Well, this celebration of Christmas is so beautiful in what actually happened in historical fact, but also what it symbolizes. Hi there. You just popped out of the ether. Nice to see you. What it symbolizes in our own lives and the spiritual teachings in general. Remember that, for example, I was driving down the street yesterday and I saw a picture of Amma, the chief minister, wishing everyone a Merry Christmas. And there's a nice poster of her smiling. And there's this big mansion behind her, this like snow-covered gingerbread house with these nice pine trees and a snowman, out by her. And I just thought, I bet she hasn't ever built a snowman in her life. I bet almost no one in Chennai ever has. And so,
the milk areas, does it snow there?
No snow.
Only Himalayas.
Only Kulu Manali, Shimla.
yeah, right. But again, not quite Chennai. And so I thought, at first it may seem like some of the images of Christmas with the snow and the trees and the little, fireplaces with people warming their hands in mittens and gloves seems very foreign to Chennai, and in a way it may seem Christmas is foreign to Chennai, but in a way Christ's life is much more present here in India than it is in those places with the mittens and the snowmen. Because after all, Christ was born in, not Israel, but I mean in Jerusalem, Israel, in this place much closer to India than it is to America and Europe. He was an Oriental, as Master put it. He was an Easterner, not a Westerner. And he also, his disciple Thomas, as you know, the Santome Church, which we can walk to from here. I mean, one of his direct disciples came here and settled here. And no direct disciple came to America. And so, in a way, the reality of the historical fact of Christ's life is more relevant in Chennai, or at least more familiar to Chennai, less foreign than it is to America and many parts of Europe. So the symbolism, of course, of Christ being born is what all the religions do at this time of year, celebrating in the darkest period of the year. I mean, the 21st or 22nd, the solstice, is the shortest day of the year, where we have the least daylight. And in Chennai, it means it's about 5 minutes shorter, than any other day, because we're so close to the equator. Who cares? But in the north, way up north, the sun doesn't even rise for different times of the year. So it's very much a dark time, and also way down in the south for those few people living in the southern hemisphere. So the thing is that Christ's life also has a deep relevance to us on this path, because we are all sitting here, so Babaji tells us, only because Christ appeared to him and said, send a mission to the West. In the West, and I would like to add by extension the East, that although outward good works are done, service is done to others, certainly through Christianity is what he was speaking of, I think primarily. Christ was his own followers. And you'll hear about it in the Festival of Light, if you have remembered that particular passage. He said they've forgotten the noble art of inner communion. That part has been lost in Christianity. It used to be a part of Christianity historically and was kind of pushed aside. And Christianity was given a different emphasis as it evolved over the years. In the East, though inner communion is very much still respected and pursued, still, how to go about it? We thought when we first came to India, people would just say, well, I know Lom Vilom and I know all these things you're teaching, and so what's the point? But not Kriya, and not the reason why Hong Sa works, and what to actually do, and moreover than that, joining together with other truth seekers and encouraging each other, and magnetizing each other by our combined practice, and devotion, and so on, and like-mindedness, all these things. So, having said all that, it was Christ who initiated this whole path to come. Now, it's not that Babaji wasn't aware of this need, and if Christ hadn't mentioned to it, or when Christ, he said, wow, Maria, I mean, Babaji knew all of this. It's just that this is the way they chose to play out that drama. And as Master said, we are guided by these two world avatars, Christ not in form, not in the body, and Babaji in the body. So it's very relevant to us. We're sitting in these chairs, in this room, because of that morning when Christ came to Babaji, or whenever it was. And Asha once said, now how did that exactly work? I mean, was Babaji at his cave, did Christ go up to Babaji's cave and knock, and Babaji was just finishing breakfast, and, you know, I mean, so we don't know exactly how it worked out, but that's what Master told Swamiji, how the whole thing was initiated. So regardless of any past or cultural or historical or anything, for us, ourselves, there's a deeply meaningful personal connection with Christ that way. And so, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Christmas Day, what we're celebrating today, and some of its meaning, and some of its also connection with the life of Krishna. Because I'll start with the life of Krishna, which may be more familiar. And remember, Krishna and Christ are actually the same word in their essence. Krishna is sometimes written as Krishna in India to show how similar it is to Christ. And the literal English word is the anointed, but I mean it's such a obscure word. It basically means the chosen, the blessed, the vehicle for
Greek,
God.
isn't it?
And so, sorry?
There is some Greek or something, no?
Yeah, no, Christos, I think, is where it comes from, also, historically. But again, Krishna and Christ already, you can see, regardless of any origin, they are similar. And the same thing Master said, Krishna was Krishna's title, just as Christ is Christ's title, not his name. Jesus the Christ, Yadava, or Jadava the Krishna. And so, Krishna, as you know, his mother, Devaki, was getting married, and Kamsa was offering to drive their chariot home, and then the voice came out of the sky. I'm telling it very quickly, assuming you could all tell it forwards and backwards. That said, oh, you fool, you are driving this woman whose child will kill you. And so he says, well, not if I kill her first. And then Vasudeva says, please, her husband says, please don't. We'll give you every child so that at least my wife shall live, and so on. So they're thrown into the dungeon. All the 7 babies are born, 7, right? 7 beforehand, are born before Krishna, and Kamsa kills them all. And it's horrible. And you have to think, why was Kamsa so ferociously against this? Obviously he didn't want to die, but killing children means, so it's pretty bad karma, I think. Even he could have figured that one out. And so the point is that worldliness, Kamsa in this case represents the world, material desire, the world versus the spirit. They are always at war. And the world is threatened by the spiritual because it knows that it will be undone that way. It doesn't mean if you live a spiritual life you can't also be in the world. Obviously you know that. The opposite is true. But you can't be committed. Your worldly ambitions will dissolve and turn into spiritual ones. So, put another way, Kamsa can also represent the ego that says, oh no, you don't want to meditate, don't meditate. And if you try to meditate, I'll try to thwart you and stop you from becoming spiritual, because if you become too spiritual, the ego gets defeated. So this is what's going on inside of us also, and why there's such a ferocious fight against the light. You might say, well, why not Kamsa say, we could use some more light and blessings in this world. Please, come on in. And please come on in. But the reason is because that will all be undone. The evil will be defeated, and so on. And so, then Krishna is born, and just skipping lightly over all that, he's switched and he's raised in hiding with Yashoda and Nanda, and finally he comes back. And in this particular case, in Krishna's case, he does kill Kamsa and so on. Now remember, he kills the evil villain, and yet Kamsa, being touched by the foot of Krishna, goes into ecstasy. And Kamsa attained either liberation or close to liberation in that life because he hated Krishna so much he couldn't stop thinking about him. And there's even that backstory of how he was the guard of Vishnu, and these people came and the guards got in trouble, and so they said, you can be reborn as Krishna. Vishnu said, you can, as punishment, you can either be born for whatever it is, 15 lives as my devotee, or 3 lives as my enemy. And of course they loved him so much, they said, please, let us be your enemy so we can get it over with and come back. So you love these stories because they tell us no matter what we think about some situation and our judgment of this person, that we have no idea the intricacy of the play of love behind all of these things. So keeping this in mind, now going to perhaps the less familiar to you, story of the birth of Christ. Remember concept. So the way it's sort of, in one way it's introduced in the Bible is that there was a king named Herod. He was the king of a kingdom, and in fact the kingdom where Jesus was to be born into. And 3 wise men came from the east. And Master said, in fact, they came from, India. And in fact, they were previous incarnations of Babaji, Lahiri Mahashaya, and Shri Yukteswar. And we have a lot of fun in Christmas because there's a song called, it's not
We Three
Wise-
Kings.
We Three Kings of Orient Are. And you might have heard that song. And there's one really rough verse, thank you, that talks about, anyway, I won't even say it because it's too gross, but it just emphasizes the crucifixion of Christ and the bitterness and all this. And, you're kind of like, this is the birth of Christ, not the end of it. And so you're kind of like, scratching, bleeding, dying, it just doesn't fit. So we rewrote that verse that says, I wish I had the words in my mind, but we'll bring them. But look for them, because suddenly the people at the houses are clapping with us, and then we're saying, Shri Yukteswar and Babaji. Just something happened there, but we're not sure what. So it is the case, though, that Master said it was these 3 great avatars, which makes you wonder, well, if they were all there, where was Master? But anyway, we'll leave that to speculation. In any case, they came to Herod and said there's a prophecy that the king of the Jews will be born. And nearby, in Judea, in this area, can you guide us to Bethlehem or to Nazareth or to the different places where he might be? And so Herod sent them, but he was very concerned because after all, he was the king. So he said to them, oh, please, once you find him, send me word so that I may go and worship him. Means so I can go and kill him. And so the wise men said, okay, sure. And so then they went in the right direction. Remember, it says they followed the star in the east. And as we've talked about before, this can't have been a physical star. Some people say, no, it was a comet that came. I mean, they came from the Orient. They came from India to the Middle East. So they're going westward. So how could they follow a star in the east? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And it's because the symbol, and then the star they followed came to rest upon a particular house, and that's where Jesus was born. Stars, you walk with the stars and they just keep going. No matter where you go, they keep going. They don't suddenly stop. And so first of all, the star has to mean, of course, the spiritual eye, the star of the spiritual eye. And in fact, the Hebrew word for east is kedem. And kedem also means forehead. And it's even explained that the forehead is the eastern direction in the body and so on. This is north, south, and of course, where do you think west is? Who lives there but the ego? So, this is the deeper truth, not just symbolism. Yes, these are historical facts, but it was so dramatic that there's a relevant symbolism for us in our spiritual lives. If we follow the star in the east, if we concentrate here, we're guided by our soul. So, They brought him gifts. You heard the song put very nicely. The animals were all there. The angels came and sang. It was a blessed moment, just like the birth of Krishna. The whole world and universe responded. Remember, in Krishna's case, the gates of the prison opened, the Yamuna parted, Krishna was on top of Vasudeva's head, but everything, his whole path was clear. The whole world was supporting the arrival of this avatar. And the same for Christ. Then, the wise men were warned in a dream, it says, that they should not go back to Herod because he had sinister plans. And so they returned to their own country another way, it says. Then the king, Herod, found out that they had tricked him, that they hadn't come back. And it says he was exceedingly wroth. He was very angry. And so he hunted down all the children that would have been the age of Christ, and even 2 years older, just, for good measure, and killed them all. Have you ever heard of that before? I mean, Kamsa only killed 7. Well, and then maybe only 6, because one of them, was the goddess. So, and then there's Balarama too, but that's... So, you see, it's the same story. And so you see how desperate our worldly tendencies are, in this case symbolized by the king. Who is the king of our physical body kingdom? Until we're liberated. Until that time that we're liberated, the king is not the soul. When we become liberated, the king the king is the soul. Before then, the king is the ego. And so similarly, the ego fights tooth and nail, desperately, even resorting to vicious, underhanded things like killing children, which means, in this case, what would the children symbolize? Our spiritual aspirations, our tender feelings. How often have we felt a devotional feeling or something tender, which also makes us vulnerable? And then, even if no one else criticizes it, we criticize ourselves. I've got to be more focused and practical. I got to stop all this woo stuff, and I need to just get down to business. It even comes inside of us. Or, did you see how you behaved yesterday, and you're trying to be all spiritual now? These voices come because that ego is fighting for its life. And so, this is the relevant symbolism too, that though this is the birth of these tender little babies, they're very powerful little babies, that also, was there any doubt that Christ would win? And again, the final victory of Christ is given by his resurrection, especially in such a dark age, that you could be killed and come back to life. I mean, that's it. A+, you win the whole thing, because it was so beyond anyone that the body could come back, that there was any reality beyond the body, and so on. Except vaguely, yes, God exists, but not in this miraculous way. So it's something for us to keep in mind, that sometimes we have to do battle with that egotistical tendency, because it will do battle with us. Of course, this is symbolized in much more detail, with much more clarity in the Mahabharata, with Bhishma representing the ego. And it gives you a different picture of the ego, because if Kamsa is the ego, he's vicious, though liberated at the end. And that's important to remember, because it's true of the ego too. Ultimately, the ego, as Bhishma did, can't be killed. Remember, Bhishma couldn't be killed. He only would die when he himself chose. And that symbolizes the ego only when it itself surrenders and says, okay, my game is up. It has to voluntarily merge itself into the infinite. And so that's the case with what Bhishma did, and it's the case also with that, in the case of Kamsa. In the case of Herod, he just sort of died of old age, and I don't think he had any particular vile end, even though he'd done all those awful things. We don't know what happened to him in the next life, and so on. But just the parallels between the lives of these two avatars are striking. And also that they were born in such humble circumstances. Jesus was born in a manger, which is a trough where animals eat out of. Isn't that what it is?
Well, it's the whole, where animals live.
Yeah, I mean, like a
Like
shed.
a barn, a shed,
Yeah.
like a cow shed, basically a cow shed.
And the cows were there. I mean, it wasn't like, why don't you move out of the way because of baby Jesus? They're just like, look, if you could find a space, then you can be born. That's it. It's our shed. And why was this? I mean, it might be worth mentioning because you might say, I mean, how did this come to pass? There was a census that was actually taking place, and so everyone, in order to count the population, they had to return to their native place. And so they all went to their own village, his father's village, Joseph's village. But because everybody was returning to the village, there was no space. They had left the village long ago, so they didn't have a home there. And so they went to these different inns, hotels basically. And each one, they said, there's no room at the inn, which we sometimes laugh at, because I mean, here God is trying to be born on earth. No, sorry, not for you, there's no room, because of what it will mean for the worldliness in us. And so finally they came upon this farmer. I think they met the farmer, else they found the barn. In any case, that's where they ended up. Similarly, Krishna born in a dungeon. I mean, it tells you what the world thinks of the coming of this spiritual rejuvenation. And it usually comes also at a time when the world needs it. As you know, it says in the Gita, whenever virtue declines and vice predominates, I incarnate myself on earth to destroy evil. And as Swamiji points out, not evildoers, but evil. In fact, there was a Saint Bernadette in France, Bernadette of Lourdes, who was an uneducated girl but had these visions of Divine Mother, you can say. And she was saying things that the priest and actually people who started opposing her were concerned that either it was from the devil, or if she really was this blessed, she might be smarter than they and might take over. So either way, we have to take care of her. And so at one point, she had a few allies too, and one asked her, what is a sinner? And she said, one who loves evil. And he said, that's a beautiful answer. It's not one who does evil. Because we make mistakes all the time. Even as Arjuna says, why is man compelled against his will to do evil? Against his will. We know we're not supposed to react. We know we're supposed to be calm. We know we've done our Hang Sa today. And then one little person says one little thing and and we think, oh, but I'm a yogi. But I read the book and it says don't yell. And you know, there's a funny story about this too that says, Lord, today I have thought only of you. I have felt peace in my heart. For the whole day I have wished well to others. I have prayed for others. And I have not thought about myself for the whole day. But I'm about to get out of bed now and start my day. So could you please help me along? It's true. It's just like, yeah, I could do that for about a second or two, and then the Maya comes in and so on. So all this is to say that, there was one other thought about Bernadette, but I can't quite remember it now. In any case, there's a beautiful movie about her life, and you'll find the beautiful connections between the saints of all religions, that their devotion, the miracles in their lives are so encouraging for all of us. So just to say that remember that the birth of Jesus is, again, he was an avatar coming to earth, just as Krishna came, just at a time when it was such a rejuvenation was desperately needed. And he brought many teachings, but again, he couldn't speak as clearly as Krishna did, because he lived in a darker time, which may first seem strange because Krishna lived further back in time, so it may seem, well, that was even less modern. But of course, according to the yugas, as Sri Yukteswar explained, Krishna was at the time of descending Dwapara into Kali. And so Dwapara, of course, was a higher time. And so similarly, I mean, on the other hand, Jesus came in the darkest depths of Kali. So did Buddha. And so did others. So did many Indian saints. And so it isn't that these times are spiritually void and black, but you can't explain to someone in Kali Yuga that the soul that's in me is a spark of the infinite, just as the soul in you were made of the same essence. Look at us, we're not the same essence. It's totally different. And so that now we can talk about energy, all these things. So Jesus specifically and purposely spoke almost in riddles, you could say. He spoke in what they're called parables, but symbolic things that you had to decipher and figure out what it meant. To his disciples he spoke openly, but to the crowds he didn't, because they wouldn't have understood. Whereas Krishna was able to say, Arjuna, you and I have lived many times. I remember all my lives, you don't. I mean, you may not agree with it, but you don't have to guess. Now when he says, we've lived many times, it's like he said, we've lived many times, bas. He said exactly what he meant. So it makes it easier in a way to understand the meaning. Realizing the meaning in ourselves, of course, is a different thing. So in any case, as Dharmini said, it's also a very fun and joyful time, and the birth of Christ is a very tender time, just as Gopala and once he's safe with Yashoda and Nanda, that sort of, that time of nurturing this realization in us. We have to take care of it. As Master said, if you have a growing little baby tree, you have to put a little wall around it so it's not eaten by the animals. You have to keep it watered. You have to nurture it through those delicate stages of life. As one person said, you know you've been a good parent if you've been able to kind of keep the baby alive. That's the main job of the parent when the baby is small, is just keep it going because it's delicate. And so in the same way, this Christ consciousness, this Krishna consciousness, the birth of our own inner freedom, we have to nurture and take care of and consider as precious. And the reason it's the most precious is because it's that which is what we really want. It's that which will free us. And everybody has it, but there's no guarantee that every person is interested. And we are all interested, and let's act on that interest. So, God bless you, and happy Christmas.